Good afternoon, my dear. Please, I need a small favor from you.
Good afternoon, ma. How can I help? I pray it's something within my power to do, ma.
Just need to go and get something for this boy to eat from the other side. Please, can you watch him for me? It will only take a few minutes.
Of course, ma. No problem at all. Leave him with me. Thank you so much, my dear.
Junior, stay here with Auntie. I'm coming, okay? Sit here so I can see you, okay? Do not go anywhere.
A few moments later.
Please, did you help me see a little child? A little child, please, help me!
A woman agreed to help a stranger's child for one afternoon. By that evening, the boy was missing. By the next morning, she was in handcuffs. And it would be over a year before the truth came out. And by then, she had already lost more than her freedom. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so anytime we drop something new, you will be the first to know. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Sandra was 31 years old, and she had built her life with her own two hands. She owned a small shop in a busy market street, the kind of shop that sells a little of everything: snacks, drinks, household items, the kind of place where regular customers become familiar faces, and familiar faces become friends. Sandra had opened that shop 4 years earlier with savings she had collected over a decade of careful work. She was proud of it in the quiet way that people are proud of things they built slowly and honestly. She lived with her father in a modest house not far from the market. Her mother had moved to stay with relatives in another town some years before, and her sibling worked long hours at a factory job across the city. It was mostly Sandra and her father now, the two of them settled into the comfortable rhythm of a small household that had weathered its share of hard seasons together. Her father was the kind of man people described as honest before they described him as anything else. He had worked hard his whole life. He had sacrificed for his children without ever making it feel like a burden. And he adored Sandra in the specific way that fathers adore daughters who remind them of everything good they tried to put into the world. Every evening, when Sandra closed the shop, she would walk home and find her father waiting on the porch, and they would sit together and talk about the day. It was a small, simple life, but it was a good one. Sandra was known in her neighborhood for one particular quality above all others. She could not walk past someone in need without doing something about it. If an elderly woman was struggling to carry her bags, Sandra would carry them the rest of the way. If a child was crying and lost in the market, Sandra would be the first one crouching down to ask what was wrong. She gave food to people who could not pay. She extended credit to families she knew were struggling, often writing off the debt entirely when she saw they could not manage it. People in the neighborhood loved her for it. Some warned her she was too trusting. She always laughed it off. She believed that the world generally rewarded kindness with kindness, and for 31 years, that belief had mostly held true. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a woman Sandra recognized vaguely from the neighborhood approached her shop with a small boy, perhaps 4 years old, holding her hand. The woman explained that she needed to step away quickly to handle something urgent and asked if Sandra could keep an eye on her son for just a few minutes while she went to a nearby shop to get him something to eat. Sandra did not hesitate. She had done this kind of small favor for neighbors more times than she could count. She smiled at the little boy, gave him a biscuit from behind the counter, and told the mother to take her time. The mother thanked her and walked off toward the food stalls a short distance away. Sandra turned back to her customers, glancing occasionally at the boy who sat happily on a small stool near the entrance of her shop, eating his biscuit and watching the market activity around him. It was an afternoon like any other. Until it wasn't.
Sandra was busy attending to a customer when she next looked toward the entrance of the shop. The stool where the boy had been sitting was empty. She felt a small flicker of concern, but told herself he had probably wandered just outside to look at something interesting, the way young children do. She finished with her customer quickly and stepped outside to look. He was not there. She walked a short distance in each direction, scanning the market crowd for a small boy in a blue shirt. She told herself he could not have gone far. Children that age moved quickly, but not impossibly far. She called out softly, not wanting to alarm anyone unnecessarily, still believing this was a small problem that would resolve itself within minutes. Minutes passed. The boy did not appear. Sandra's concern began to sharpen into something closer to fear. She asked nearby stall owners if they had seen a small boy in a blue shirt. Some had noticed him sitting outside her shop earlier, but none had seen where he went. The market was busy, the way it always was at that time of day, crowds moving in every direction, the kind of environment where a small child could disappear from view in seconds. She searched for nearly 20 minutes before the boy's mother returned. The mother arrived carrying food, smiling, expecting to find her son exactly where she left him. When she saw the empty stool and Sandra's panicked expression, something in her face changed instantly. "Where is my son?" Sandra tried to explain, her own voice shaking now, that she had only looked away for a few minutes, that she had been searching, that they needed to look together calmly. The mother did not hear calm. She heard only that her child was gone. What followed happened with a speed that Sandra would spend the next year trying to understand. The mother's fear turned to panic, and panic turned to accusation. She began shouting in the middle of the crowded market that Sandra had taken her son, that Sandra had done something to him, that Sandra was responsible. A crowd gathered quickly, the way crowds do when there is shouting and a missing child involved. Sandra tried to explain herself, tried to keep her own voice level, even as her heart was pounding with real fear for the missing boy and growing fear for what was happening to her in that moment. Nobody in the gathering crowd seemed interested in calm explanations. The mother's accusations grew louder, more certain, more specific. She said Sandra had been alone with her son. She said Sandra must know where he was. She said Sandra was hiding something. Someone in the crowd called the police. By the time officers arrived, the situation had already hardened into a narrative that Sandra could not undo, no matter what she said. A child was missing. A woman had been the last person seen with him. The mother was certain. The crowd had already decided who was responsible before any investigation had truly begun. Sandra was asked to come to the station for questioning. She went willingly, certain that once she explained everything clearly, the situation would be resolved. She believed in the system. She believed that the truth, once examined properly, would protect her the way it always had before. She had no idea that this would be the last ordinary moment of freedom she would experience for over a year.
The questioning at the police station did not go the way Sandra expected. She told the officers exactly what had happened. The mother had asked her to watch the boy. She had agreed. She had been distracted briefly with customers. The boy had disappeared in that brief window. She had searched immediately and thoroughly. She had no idea where he was now and was as desperate to find him as anyone. The officers listened, but the story they had already been told by the boy's distraught mother, repeated with increasing certainty in the chaos of the market, had already shaped how they were hearing Sandra's account. A missing child case creates enormous pressure. Pressure to find the child, pressure to be seen doing something, pressure that in the wrong circumstances can push an investigation toward the easiest available answer rather than the most thorough one.
Sandra was the easiest available answer. She had been the last person with the boy. There were no other immediate witnesses to what happened in those critical minutes. The mother was insistent and emotional and certain, and somewhere in the urgency of the moment, the careful, methodical work of actually investigating what happened took a back seat to the need to be seen taking action. Sandra was arrested that evening on suspicion of involvement in the boy's disappearance. She remembers the specific disbelief of that moment, being placed in a holding cell, still in the clothes she had worn to open her shop that morning, still smelling faintly of the market, trying to process how an afternoon that began with a simple favor for a neighbor had ended with her behind bars. She kept waiting for someone to realize the mistake. She kept expecting the door to open and someone to tell her this had all been resolved, that the boy had been found safe, that she could go home. That did not happen. The investigation into the boy's whereabouts continued, but so did the case against Sandra. Days passed. She remained in custody. Her father came to see her as soon as he was permitted, his face carrying an expression of devastation that broke something in Sandra worse than her own fear did. He held her hands through the visiting glass and told her, "We are going to fight this. I am not stopping until you are home." Sandra believed him. She had to believe him. It was the only thing keeping her upright in those first disorienting days. Her shop sat closed and locked in the market, the inventory slowly beginning to spoil, the customers who relied on her finding other places to shop, the small business she had built over 4 careful years beginning to unravel in her absence. Her father began doing everything he could think of. He hired a lawyer with money he did not have. He spoke to anyone who would listen. He visited Sandra every single permitted visiting day, sitting across from her with a steadiness that Sandra would later realize had cost him far more than he ever let her see. Weeks turned into months. The boy had still not been found, and without his location confirmed, without proof of what had actually happened that afternoon, the case against Sandra remained open, the legal process grinding forward with the particular slowness that systems develop when there is no clear resolution in sight. Sandra settled into the specific numbness of someone living inside a nightmare that does not end when morning comes. The reality of incarceration settled over Sandra slowly, the way cold settles into a room when the heating fails, not all at once, but in a steady accumulation that eventually becomes the only temperature you know. She learned the rhythms of the place she now lived, the schedule of meals, the hierarchy among the women she shared space with, the specific exhaustion of days that were simultaneously identical to each other and impossible to get through. She thought constantly about the boy. Was he safe? Was he frightened? Was someone caring for him properly? The not knowing was its own particular form of suffering, layered on top of everything else she was enduring. She had genuinely cared about that child in the brief time she had known him, and the uncertainty of his fate haunted her as much as her own situation did. Her father visited every week without fail. He always sat up straight. He always smiled when he saw her, even on the visits where Sandra could see in his eyes that something was wearing him down. He always told her the same thing in different words. "We are going to fight this. Hold on. I am not stopping." He never told her about the shop closing permanently. He never told her about selling pieces of furniture from their home to pay the lawyer's fees. He never told her about the nights he could not sleep, walking the length of their now sparsely furnished living room, praying for a breakthrough that did not seem to be coming. He carried all of it alone, presenting Sandra with nothing but steady reassurance every single time he sat across from her. Sandra's sibling visited when work schedules allowed, which was less often than either of them wanted. The factory job that had once felt stable now felt like the only thing standing between the family and complete collapse, and missing shifts to make the long visiting hours was not always possible. Months passed this way. Sandra's case moved through the system with the specific slowness that cases without clear resolution tend to move. No new evidence had emerged about the boy's whereabouts. No witness had come forward. The investigation that should have been working to clarify what actually happened that afternoon seemed to have stalled entirely, leaving Sandra suspended in a kind of legal limbo that had no clear timeline for ending. She marked time by her father's visits, Tuesdays and Saturdays. She lived for those 2 days each week, the only points of genuine human connection in an existence that had otherwise narrowed down to survival. She asked about her father's health sometimes, noticing that he seemed more tired with each visit, his clothes looser, his face thinner. He always brushed off her concern. He told her she was fine. He told her not to worry about him, that she had enough to carry without adding his well-being to the list. She believed him. She had no reason not to. What Sandra did not know, what nobody had yet found the courage to tell her, was that her father's health had been declining far more seriously than his cheerful visiting room demeanor ever let on. The stress, the financial strain, the relentless fight he had taken on for his daughter had been quietly taking a toll on a body that was already not as strong as it used to be. She would not learn the full truth of what was happening to her father for many more months. By then, it would already be too late to do anything but grieve. What Sandra's father did during the months of her imprisonment was the kind of quiet, relentless sacrifice that rarely gets witnessed by the person it is being done for. He sold the small plot of land he had been saving for retirement, the land he had once told Sandra he hoped to build a small second house on someday. He sold it without telling her, using the money to pay for a more experienced lawyer who specialized in cases exactly like Sandra's. He sold furniture from their home, piece by piece, replacing what he could with cheaper alternatives so the house would not look completely bare on the rare occasions someone visited. He told Sandra during visits that everything at home was fine, that there was nothing for her to worry about. He took on additional work himself, despite his age and despite a body that was beginning to struggle under the physical demands of labor he had not done in years. He needed the money. There was no version of fighting for his daughter's freedom that did not require resources he did not have, and so he found ways to generate those resources, regardless of what it cost him personally. He spoke to anyone who might be able to help. Community leaders, local officials, anyone with any influence over how quickly cases moved through the system. He was not a man with connections or wealth, but he refused to let that stop him from trying every avenue available to an ordinary man fighting for his child. The lawyer he hired began working to push the investigation forward, arguing that the case against Sandra had never been properly substantiated, that the actual disappearance of the boy had never been adequately investigated because the system had settled too quickly on Sandra as the explanation, rather than continuing to search for what had truly happened. It was slow, difficult work. The legal system does not move quickly, even when the people pushing it are desperate. Every motion filed took weeks to be heard. Every request for review took months to be scheduled. Sandra's father absorbed all of this delay personally, each setback landing on him with a weight that he never once let Sandra see. Through all of it, he kept coming to those visiting room sessions, Tuesdays and Saturdays, sitting up straight, smiling at his daughter through the glass, telling her, "We are going to fight this. I am not stopping until you are home." He meant every word of it. What he did not say, what he could not bring himself to say, was that the fight was costing him pieces of himself that would not grow back. The stress was affecting his heart in ways he had not yet told anyone about, not even his other child, not even the lawyer he saw regularly. He had been having episodes of chest pain that he dismissed as exhaustion.
He had been losing weight that he attributed to worry rather than illness. He believed, with the specific stubbornness of a man who has decided his purpose, that he simply needed to hold on long enough to see Sandra free. He believed his body would cooperate with that determination, the way his will had cooperated with every other demand he had placed on it throughout his life. He was wrong. Almost a year into Sandra's imprisonment, her father collapsed at home, alone, in the quiet of a house that had been slowly emptied of nearly everything he owned in service of bringing his daughter home.
Sandra's sibling found their father later that same evening, having come by the house after a long shift to check on him the way they tried to do regularly when work permitted. By the time help arrived, it was already too late. The grief that hit Sandra's family in that moment was complicated by an impossible question. How do you tell a woman sitting in jail, fighting to survive each day on the belief that her father is fighting just as hard on the outside, that the very fight he was undertaking for her had cost him his life? Sandra's sibling made a decision in those first devastating days that would later become one of the hardest things they ever had to explain. They decided not to tell Sandra. Not yet. Not while she was still inside, with no support system around her, no privacy to process something so enormous, no ability to attend a funeral or grieve in any of the ways a person needs to grieve a parent. They told themselves it was protection. They told themselves Sandra had enough to carry already without adding this. So when Sandra asked, visit after visit, where her father was, why he had not come, her sibling told her he was traveling, handling some urgent business outside the city, something that required him to be away for a while. Sandra believed it, the way she had believed everything else, because she had no reason not to. Her father had occasionally traveled for work in the past. It was not an implausible explanation. She missed him during those visits, but trusted that he would come as soon as he was able. She did not know that the man she was waiting to see again was already gone. She did not know that her sibling carried the unbearable weight of that secret into every visiting room session, rehearsing explanations for why her father could not come this time either, swallowing grief that had nowhere to go, because expressing it honestly would have meant breaking the careful lie they had constructed. Sandra's sibling visited the grave alone during those months, unable to bring Sandra, unable to share the burden with the one person who had as much right to grieve as anyone. They stood at that graveside repeatedly, having one-sided conversations meant for two people, carrying grief that should have been shared, but instead had to be carried in isolation. The lawyer continued working the case, unaware for some time of the family tragedy unfolding alongside the legal fight, eventually learning of it and adjusting his approach with the added weight of representing a client whose father, the man who had hired him, who had sacrificed everything to fund this fight, would never see the outcome of his efforts. Months continued to pass this way, Sandra in her cell, believing her father was simply delayed in returning, her sibling carrying a secret that grew heavier with every visit, the case moving forward slowly, built on evidence that was finally beginning to surface about what had actually happened to the missing boy on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon so long ago. Nobody knew yet that the resolution to Sandra's case and the devastating truth about her father would arrive within days of each other, forcing her family to finally tell her everything at the worst and best possible moment simultaneously.
Months passed in jail with no real movement. Sandra had grown used to the rhythm of it. The same four walls, the same routine, the same unanswered questions about her father. But one afternoon, something changed. Her lawyer requested an urgent visit, and the moment Sandra saw his face, she knew it was not another delay. "They found the boy," he told her. "He is alive. He is safe." Sandra broke down right there in the visiting room.
For over a year, she had carried the weight of not knowing if the boy was okay, not knowing if she would ever be believed, not knowing if her name would be cleared. Now, finally, there was a thread of hope to hold on to. The story that came out was almost unbelievable. The boy had not been taken by anyone. While Sandra had been distracted with customers, he had wandered off on his own, curious and restless the way young children often are, and had followed a group of older children playing a few streets away. A neighbor had taken him in when she noticed he was alone and confused, assuming his family would come looking soon. But that neighbor had been preparing to leave town for work and, in the rush of her own circumstances, had taken the boy with her, intending to find his family upon her return, unaware that an entire investigation and an innocent woman's freedom had been hanging in the balance the whole time. It took time for this information to surface. The neighbor had not been aware of any kidnapping report. The police had not connected the dots quickly enough, and the boy's mother, consumed by fear and grief in those early days, had been too quick to point a finger rather than wait for the facts. When the truth finally came out, it should have meant immediate freedom for Sandra. But the legal system rarely moves as fast as justice demands. There were still procedures, still paperwork, still officials who needed to review and approve her release. Sandra's lawyer pushed hard, using the new evidence to file for an emergency hearing. Word of the development reached the boy's mother as well. The woman who had once stood in the street and screamed accusations now had to sit with the reality of what her fear had caused. She had not just delayed justice, she had taken over a year away from a woman who had done nothing but try to help her son. Sandra did not know how to feel. Relief and anger tangled together inside her. She was finally going to be free, but that freedom had come too late to undo what had already been lost, including, though she still did not know it, the father she still believed was simply away on a trip. As the court date for her release approached, Sandra's family faced a decision they could no longer avoid. It was time to tell her the truth.
The day before Sandra's release hearing, Sandra's siblings sat across from her in the visiting room, hands trembling, rehearsing words that never felt right, no matter how many times they had practiced them in the mirror at home. Sandra noticed immediately. "What is wrong? You are free now, too. Why do you look like that?" There was a long silence. Then finally, the truth came out, slow and broken. Dad did not travel. Dad collapsed almost a year ago. Dad had been gone the entire time Sandra had been waiting for him to visit again. Sandra sat frozen, the words taking longer to register than they should have. A year. He had been gone for almost a year, and she had spent that time asking about him during every single visit, wondering why he had not come, never once imagining the answer was the one thing she feared most. The grief that hit her was not just about losing her father, it was about losing the chance to grieve him properly. She had not been there for the funeral. She had not been able to say goodbye. She had not even known to mourn, because for almost a year she had believed he was simply away, coming back any day now. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Her sibling explained everything, the fear of breaking her in a place where she had no support system, no privacy, no way to properly process something so devastating. They had wanted to protect her, even if it meant carrying the weight of the secret alone for nearly a year. Sandra did not know whether to be angry or grateful. Both feelings sat heavy in her chest at the same time. She understood why they had done it, but understanding did not make the pain any smaller. That night, in her cell, for what she now knew would be one of her last nights there, Sandra allowed herself to grieve in private, quietly, without an audience, the way she had been forced to hold so much of herself together over the past year.
She thought about her father's voice through the visiting room glass. "We are going to fight this. I am not stopping until you are home." He had kept that promise, even if it cost him everything, even if he had not lived to see the day it finally came true. The next morning, Sandra walked into court for her release hearing, carrying two realities at once: the relief of finally being free and the unbearable weight of a goodbye she never got the chance to say.
The hearing did not take long. With the new evidence presented, the charges against Sandra were formally dropped, and after more than a year behind bars for a crime she never committed, Sandra walked out of that courthouse a free woman. There was no big celebration waiting outside, no crowd cheering her name, just her sibling standing quietly by the car, holding back tears, watching the sister they had fought so hard to bring home finally take her first steps as a free woman again. Sandra stood in the sunlight for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing in air that did not smell like a cell. It should have felt like everything. Instead, it felt like half of something. Freedom without the father who had sacrificed everything to make it happen. Freedom that had arrived almost a year too late to change the outcome that mattered most to her. The first place she asked to go was not home. It was the cemetery. Standing in front of her father's grave for the first time, Sandra finally let everything out. Every tear she had held back in that visiting room, every emotion she had been forced to swallow while locked away, every word she never got to say to the man who had sold everything he owned trying to save her. "You kept your promise," she whispered, kneeling in the grass. "I am home, Dad. I am finally home." Her sibling stood a few feet back, giving her the space to grieve the way she had not been allowed to before. For the first time in over a year, the family was not hiding anything from each other. The truth, painful as it was, had finally settled between them, and somehow that honesty made the grief feel a little more bearable than the silence had. In the days that followed, Sandra slowly began piecing her life back together. The shop she once owned had long since closed, the inventory sold off or spoiled, the space rented out to someone else entirely. Everything she had built before that one fateful afternoon was gone, taken not by the system that wrongly imprisoned her, but by the year it stole from her while she sat waiting for justice to catch up to the truth. But Sandra was alive. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, her family was finally together, even if one chair at the table would always remain empty. The road ahead was not going to be easy. The debts her father left behind still needed to be paid. Her mother still needed support. Her own life needed to be rebuilt from nothing. But Sandra had something now that she had not had in over a year: the freedom to fight for that future herself, instead of watching from behind bars while someone else fought for her.
The weeks after Sandra's release were some of the hardest adjustment periods of her life. Freedom, she realized, came with its own kind of weight. She had to relearn things most people took for granted, walking down a street without someone watching her every move, making her own decisions about her day, sitting in a room with four walls closing in around her. She moved back in with her mother, the two of them finally reunited after years of distance that had been forced on them by circumstance rather than choice. Her mother, who had aged more in the last year than Sandra had ever seen, held her tightly the first night she came home, the two of them crying together over everything they had lost and everything they still had left. Sandra's sibling continued working tirelessly, but now Sandra insisted on helping carry the load instead of being someone everyone else had to provide for. She took on small jobs at first, anything that paid, anything that helped chip away at the debt that still hung over the family. It was not the shop she once had, but it was a start.
People in the old neighborhood reacted differently when they saw her again. Some avoided eye contact, ashamed of how quickly they had turned their backs on her when the accusations first surfaced. Others approached her with apologies, admitting they should have defended her, should have spoken up instead of staying silent while rumors spread unchecked. Sandra did not hold on to bitterness the way some expected her to. She had spent over a year locked away with nothing but time to think, and somewhere in that time, she had made peace with the fact that anger would not bring back what she lost. It would not bring her father back. It would not undo the year stolen from her life. All she could do now was move forward. There was, however, one conversation she still needed to have, one she had been avoiding since her release. The boy's mother had reached out through their lawyers, asking for the chance to speak with Sandra directly. Part of Sandra wanted to refuse, but another part of her, the same part that had once said yes to a stranger's request without hesitation, wanted to hear what the woman had to say. She agreed to the meeting, unsure of what to expect, unsure if she was ready to face the person whose fear had cost her everything.
The two women sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, neither one saying anything for the first few minutes. The boy's mother looked exhausted, older than the woman Sandra remembered from that chaotic afternoon over a year ago. There was no anger left in her expression now, only what looked like deep, unshakable regret. "I do not expect you to forgive me," the woman finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed you to know how sorry I am. I was so scared that day. I was not thinking clearly, and by the time I realized what my fear had done, it was already too late to undo it." Sandra sat quietly, letting the woman speak, letting her get out everything she had clearly been carrying for over a year. The woman explained what those first few days of her son's disappearance had felt like: the panic, the sleepless nights, the desperate need to blame someone, anyone, because the alternative was sitting with the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing where her child was. She admitted that pointing the finger at Sandra had given her something to hold on to in the chaos, even if it was the wrong thing. "I did not think about what it would do to you," she said. "I did not think about your family. I just wanted someone to be responsible, and you were the last person who had seen him." Sandra finally spoke, her voice steady despite everything she was feeling. "I lost over a year of my life. I lost my father. My family lost everything they had trying to save me, and the whole time I just kept thinking about how all I did was try to help." The woman broke down, apologizing again and again, offering whatever she could: financial help, public acknowledgement of the mistake, anything that might begin to make things right. Sandra did not ask for any of it. What she wanted could not be given back. No amount of money could return the years she lost. No apology could bring her father back to see her walk free. But she also recognized something in the woman's face. The same fear that had once made her say yes to a stranger now sat across from her in the form of regret. Two women, both shaped by decisions made in moments of vulnerability, both left to carry consequences neither one had truly seen coming. Sandra did not offer forgiveness that day. She was not ready. But she also did not leave with hatred in her heart. She left with a quiet understanding that pain, fear, and consequence are rarely as simple as the world wants them to make them.
Sandra's life today looks nothing like it did before that Tuesday afternoon. She has slowly started rebuilding, taking things one step at a time, fully aware that some things, like the years she lost, like her father's presence at family gatherings, can never truly be replaced. She visits her father's grave regularly now, sometimes just to sit and talk to him the way she used to during their visits at the jail. She tells him about her days, about the small wins, about how the family is slowly recovering from everything that happened. She thanks him every single time for never giving up on her, even when it cost him his own life. Her relationship with her mother has grown stronger, the distance that once kept them apart replaced now by a closeness neither of them takes for granted anymore. They have learned the hard way how quickly time can be stolen, how easily people can drift apart simply because life gets in the way. As for her shop, Sandra has started saving toward opening a new one, smaller, slower, but hers, built from the ground up the way the first one was. She says she still believes in helping people, still believes in the kindness that defined her before everything happened, but she admits quietly that she is more careful now, more cautious, not because she has lost her heart, but because the world taught her in the harshest way possible that kindness does not always protect you from consequence. The family's debts are still being paid off, slowly, piece by piece. It will likely take years before everything her father borrowed is fully settled, but they are doing it together now. No secrets, no silence, just a family choosing to face whatever comes next as a unit instead of carrying it alone. Sandra's story is not one with a perfectly happy ending. It is a story about loss as much as it is about survival, about how one decision made with good intentions can ripple outward and touch every part of a family's life in ways no one could have predicted. But it is also a story about resilience, about a father's love that never wavered even when it cost him everything, about a family that held together through grief, debt, and distance, refusing to fully break apart no matter how much pressure came their way. This is Sandra's story, a woman who said yes to a stranger and paid for it with a year of her life and the father who fought to bring her home. Do you think the boy's mother deserves forgiveness for what her fear caused? After everything she lost, would you still choose to help a stranger the way Sandra did? Drop your answer in the comments. Like this video and share it with someone you love. I will see you on the next video.